Hey guys, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to a tank perspective of turn 9 of the Binding Coil of Bahamut, aka the second coil of Bahamut turn 4. A lot of people have been asking for tank and healer and melee DPS perspectives of the fights, and I'm going to be working to bring you guys that a little bit more frequently and a little bit quicker in the future. But anyway, we need to really get into talking about cooldown rotations, things like that, so I'll leave that for later. Now, cooldown rotation, one of the most important things. Now, because this is a paladin perspective, I'm going to be speaking about them from a paladin perspective. I'm going to be using terms like fight or flight and foresight and sentinel. But warriors, you have cooldowns that are near equivalent, and you of course have your inner beast. So just make adjustments accordingly based on how you see the tank responding here. Now, I missed a little bit, but the Raven's Beak right there, he ate that with a Rampart alone. Rampart's a really good cooldown. Lasts 20 seconds, so it can reduce the damage from the initial hit, and then because Raven's Blight will blow up 12 seconds later, if you time it right, it can actually eat both the initial hit and the second hit and reduce damage on both of them. He started the fight standardly with Fight or Flight. He used Foresight for the beginning because of the Raven's Claws that come out, which is the giant conal swipe move that you'll see a lot during this fight. He also used Bloodbath just because it's a little bit of extra healing. It doesn't hurt to use. But other than that, those are just a few things that you need to be aware of. We're going to be talking about things other than just cooldown rotation in this video, because there are things that the tanks can definitely be aware of. And you can actually learn something as a tank who's not doing turn 9, just from seeing how tanks actually do turn 9. One big one, stone skinning yourself. A lot of paladins I see don't stone skin themselves. Whenever you aren't taking damage, you don't have to rely on your healers to stone skin you. You can stone skin yourself for you. Now, that Raven's Blight's a little bit risky. Of course, your healers need to have Eloquium and Stone Skin on you every single time you get hit by a Raven's Beak. I meant to say Raven's Beak. But then, he only uses a Bulwark for that. The block most of the time is enough, assuming you actually do block. And then he uses Sentinel for the second hit. Sentinel's not as good as Rampart for these, mainly because it can only eat either the initial hit or the second hit. We decide to let him use the second hit, because it's a lot easier to have the healing, to have the Eloquiums and the Stone Skins ready for the initial hit. Sometimes with the second hit, sometimes you get hit by an auto attack right before the explosion, and it can be kind of annoying. I'll tell you right now, he's going to use Rampart for the next Raven's Beak again, and then from that point on, you don't really have many cooldowns, and we push the phase at such a time where there's no worry. But this is good up until a 5th Starfall. I believe it would mean a 4th Raven's Beak. If you're going to get a 4th Raven's Beak, and a 5th Meteor, of course, will be the indicator. If you get the 5th Meteor in this phase, you know a Raven's Beak is coming within the next 5 seconds. So you definitely need to be prepared. You will only have Awareness and Convalescence available for that. Feel free to use them. You need to reduce the damage in some way, but again, it's really going to be up to your healers to have Stone Skin and Eloquium on you. Now, there was something that he was doing the entire first part of that phase that I'll comment more on phase 3 when I have a better opportunity to talk about something other than cooldown rotation. But other than that, there are just a few standard things that tanks definitely need to be aware of. Fights that have enrages like this one, Fight or Flight and Bloodbath, just good to use every time they're available, as long as you know you'll be able to actually have uptime on the boss, be able to actually be hitting the boss for the duration. You need the added damage from Fight or Flight and Bloodbath. I know you're thinking, oh, I'm a paladin, I should probably save these for when I need to do burst damage. If there's a fight where you need to specifically have burst damage, then that's okay. Now, Golems, I do want to talk very briefly about this. You don't need defensive cooldowns for these if you're not tanking the green one. Even if you are tanking the green one, something as simple as an Inner Beast is usually good enough. One Inner Beast, maybe one of your short cooldowns, one of your light cooldowns like a Foresight, should be more than enough. Now, if you're tanking the red golem, there's not really much you can do. You just need to warn people when Earthen Heart and Heavy Strike is coming out. And if you're tanking the blue golem, now, this paladin, and I'll have a chance to talk about it again after these 3 sets of golems die, but the blue golem has a move called Magnetism, which will draw in any nearby golems or meteors. Now, if it pulls in meteors, not a big deal. If it pulls in another golem, the fight is over. You're going to instantly wipe. So Magnetism, you need to make sure that it's away from the other golems. It may hit some people in the group, and that's okay. And you'll see after we do our meteor phases, he's going to be tanking the blue golem again, so we'll have another opportunity to talk about that. We'll also have an opportunity to talk about feeding the meteors to the golems, because that can be extremely frustrating as a tank. Sometimes they just don't want to cooperate with you. You really need to get them in very, very, very close in order for it to work. So we have a little bit of downtime right here. There's not really much to talk about right here. Tank is just doing what everybody else in the group is doing. This isn't so much of a tank exercise right now as it is all 8 members need to be aware of how you're handling the meteor phase right here. If you want to know more about this meteor phase, you can check out the turn 9 guide that I actually posted on my channel. But here we go. He's going to go back into tanking the blue golem right here. And you'll see that he's in the middle of the room. That's not so safe because magnetism does have a fairly big range. So he pulls him back just slightly. So it's going to be out of the range of the red golem and the green golem. So this magnetism right here, sure, it may pull in one person, like it pulled in Celine, but everybody else separated themselves from it, so they were okay. Once that's passed, you know a magnetism won't come for at least another 30 or 40 seconds. So you're pretty much good to have it anywhere, but keep it away from the other golem just in case. Now it's the other tank's responsibility because the other tank has the blue golem, but this is where you're going to see the annoying thing. Now, as a tank, try not to feed the yellow meteors before Earthen Heart goes out right here. But even more importantly, tell your DPS not to heavy the damn golems. Because if you have a black mage who puts Blizzard in his Umbral Ice rotation, just ask him not to for the sake of that. Because as you can see, that was extremely annoying. We came very close to not being able to feed the golems. You really need to get inside of the meteor to safely feed the golems the meteor. Now, end of the phase. I think I've said everything I need to say about that phase. I'm gonna talk about the thing I missed in phase 1 now. But again, watch. Meteor, Mega Flare goes off, Stone Skinning himself. Again, another opportunity. The healers are busy AoE healing. They're not focused on Stone Skinning you. Big things right here. That is what is called Dalamud Dive. You just saw the dive move on your screen before this Heaven's Fall came out right here. It is very important whenever Dalamud Dive goes off that you don't be right at the edge of the arena like this. You need to take a couple of steps forward. Because of the way that Dalamud Dive works, you actually need to adjust the boss every time he lands. Most of the time, he'll land facing either away from the outside of the arena, most of the time towards the center of the arena. So you take a few steps forward, he lands, and you back up against the wall so you can face it away from everyone. Now, I know you're probably wondering what defensive cooldowns are you running while the off tank is tanking the big dragon over there. Well, this one we don't because we LB3 the little dragon, but coming up in a second, you are going to see he does pop a few light defensive cooldowns for the second set of dragons just to reduce healing strain on himself. Now, Heaven's Fall, you have a choice here. You can actually Tempered Will one of these Heaven's Falls and not move towards the center. We saved Tempered Will for the last phase, but basically right here, you could just use Tempered Will and stand right here, and you will be okay. You won't get knocked back into the wall because of Tempered Will, and you will actually take severely reduced damage, but damage reduction isn't really a big important thing during this one section with the boss during this phase. This is really the toughest part right here, is when the off-tank is getting hit massively hard, and I apologize for not having an off-tank perspective, but you can see, if you just look at his character right there on the party list, you can see he's got Stone Skin, Eloquium, and he's just running through defensive cooldowns. Of course, he has Inner Beast. It's really important as the off-tank to have defensive cooldowns up for those dragons. They hit very hard. If you're a warrior, you know, you either need to stagger your Vengeance and your Thrill of Battle. You need to make sure that something is available. But now we're moving into the final phase, and this is really where defensive cooldowns come very much into play. I still think it's not as bad as the Raven's Beak from the first phase, but you definitely still want to have them up. So for the final phase, our main tank, the Paladin, starts with a Rampart and Convalescence, and he'll use that for the first set of Bahamut's Claws. Our off tank will actually be eating the entire second set of Bahamut's Claws. Every time the boss does Bahamut's Favor, he's going to do 2 sets of Bahamut's Claws, one right away and one right after the Thermionic Beam that you're going to be seeing in a second. I'll make note of it when it happens. And we have the main tank eat one, and then the off tank will provoke, pop a bunch of cooldowns, and eat the second set of Bahamut's Claws. It's very, very simple. You can eat them all on your own. You have the cooldowns to do it. But you may want to use Hallowed Ground at some point if you feel the need to reduce the damage. Now, as a main tank, since you're not tanking this right here, you have to be ready to move out for Thunderstruck. Just be paying attention because it's probably the only time you're ever going to get a Thunderstruck. It's still random, but it can happen. And right after that, the main tank actually provokes it back onto himself with a shield lob, does a quick like Circle of Scorn and a damage rotation, and then he's good to go. So Moving forward, there isn't really too much. Another important thing, he makes note of where the final dragon is here during this cauterize, and he makes sure to put himself in a place that's off to the side, and that way he can make sure he's close to the wall, and the odds of anyone being next to him is very, very low. If you need to, make sure to mark your main tank who had aggro when the boss last jumped before that Dalamu dive, and make sure to note where they are standing and make sure nobody is standing next to them. So here we go, we're going into another Bahamut's Claw. Now look how not hard these Bahamut's Claws hit. With a Sentinel up, 840, with a parry or a block, 1,000, and you're only going to get hit by 4 or 5 of those. So with the tanks healing you and Eloquium and Stoneskin, a Sentinel alone is enough for an entire set of Bahamut's Claws. You really don't take that much damage from them. And other than that, you pretty much have seen everything that you need to see from a tank perspective on this fight. You need to be aware of your Ice Bitten versus your Fire Scorch debuffs. I've had situations where right here, the main tank will be targeted by a fire, and then they'll go to collapse into C, into the group, and then they'll end up just getting one shot by the fire debuff. It's extreme RNG to get fire debuffs that many times in a row, but you definitely have to be aware of it. It's very common that people will die to the fire debuff when stacking right here for this one section. Now, moving forward, this is the one last hint that I have, and we actually weren't aware of this, that this was happening, excuse me, not until after we had won. As you can see right here, the boss is going to do Iron Chariot. Now, somebody had just dropped the first cauterize mark at A, and unfortunately, he got cornered, he got pinned by that Iron Chariot. I highly recommend during the second and fourth set of Bahamut's Favor, you probably won't have to see the fourth set of Bahamut's Favor, but during the second set of Bahamut's Favor, when you have the Iron Chariot and the Lunar Dynamo coming out instead, I highly, highly, highly recommend, as a tank, do not bring the boss near A. Bring it closer to B. You definitely want to make sure that the person at A has room to run away from A. You do not want to corner them and end up either getting them killed by the cauterize or getting them knocked back into the wall because they couldn't move due to Iron Chariot. And other than that, the third set of Bahamut's Favor is exactly like the first one. You even use the same cooldowns for the first set of Bahamut's Claws, Rampart, and Convalescence as a Paladin. Of course, if you're a warrior, you can pretty much figure out, based on the cooldowns that the Paladin was using, what cooldowns you would want to use as a warrior. You have plenty of defensive cooldowns to deal with these kind of things. Now, another thing that you definitely want to keep in mind, having things such as Hallowed Ground and Holmgang, they definitely help. As you can see, this run went fairly smoothly. We had the 2 deaths because of the Iron Chariot and just because of poor dragon placement. That we actually have the option of running a Hallowed Ground or a Holmgang just to eat Bahamut's Claws. You don't want to use it other than eating Bahamut's Claws, or if you know the fight is about to end and you just want to reduce all healing strain and let your healers do maximum DPS on the boss so you can beat the Enrage, is really the only times you really need to worry about using a Hallowed Ground. If you have to use it in the earlier phases, make sure it's very, very soon in the earlier phases. This is approximately a 13-minute fight, and Hallowed Ground is a 7-minute cooldown. So this is one of those fights where you can actually get Hallowed Ground off twice. If you want to pop Hallowed Ground in the first phase just to reduce the damage, I don't see why there would be a problem with that. You just have to be aware that you won't have it for other certain parts. Maybe you need it in phase 3 and you end up not having it. So I would still just save it just in case it's going to be a life or death situation. But that's it. And now the fight is over. Hopefully you learned something about this, seeing it from the Paladin perspective, how he moved, how he used his cooldowns. I'm sure I missed a few things. Tank is actually very actively rolling through their cooldowns, casting Stoneskin on himself in the case of a Paladin, and of course making sure that he's in the right spot for Dalamu dive and dodging all the other mechanics with everyone in the final phase. Of course, I gave you a few options for things if you are looking to make a few improvements, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share if you do. I'm going to be working on a healer perspective of this soon, and of course if you would like to see the original video along with a little bit hilarious mumble, wasn't really that funny of a mumble around the time, you can check out the original video in the link below. Be sure to like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and follow me on Twitch, where I do live stream, including our raids of Turn 9. I do stream them every week. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.